All right, this is fucked.
Yeah.
You're going to have to bleep that out. Hey, I'm Joe Arby, director of the USC Wrigley Institute for Environment and Sustainability. If you've been following our work, you know what we do. We do education, we do research, we do engagement. But we have a number of programs that you might not have heard about. One of them is our Wrigley Fellows program, which is made possible by generous donations from many of our supporters. So we launched this video program directed and written by my friend, Aryan Tomar, where we feature the amazing work of these PhD students. I also wanted to say thank you to our good friends at the School of Cinematic Arts. They allowed us to film in this fantastic theater for our first video with Aidan Diamond, where we watched a series of films about climate change and the apocalypse. Don't be scared, it was good stuff. So if you haven't seen the whole video, definitely watch it. Thanks, SCA. We love you. Aidan, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too.
So happy that you're here.
I'm very excited.
I'm very excited because I don't get to do or even talk about this kind of, certainly don't get to do this kind of research, but I don't even get to really talk about it. In fact, I didn't even know that this area of research really existed.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background and what it is that you do and how you got into it.
Sure. So I'm a doctoral candidate in the program Comparative Studies for Literature and Culture. I'm on the comparative media track, which is the one that's not important enough to make it into the title. So I look at apocalypse narratives across different media, novels, films, and comics. My background is in comic studies. When I was doing my master's in Newfoundland, I was reading, of course, a lot of ongoing comics at the same time. And basically every comic I was reading was an apocalypse comic. And I wasn't looking for apocalypse comics. It was just like the convergence of creators I liked and artists that looked cool. And I thought it was so strange that everything was about apocalypse, and I thought there had to be something really exciting to say about that. So I came to USC to do comparative media and kind of broaden my comic studies horizons, and as I was getting ready to write the dissertation, I was really struggling to kind of define what the project was. And COP26 was happening at the same time in Glasgow. And that, of course, was incredibly sobering and very dispiriting. And I thought, oh, it's climate change. That's how I'm going to kind of define the project and use that as a framework to see what apocalypse narratives in the context of climate change are doing differently than previous apocalypse narratives.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really want to watch some movies with you,
Yeah.
and I really want to get your reaction to them. So,
Of course.
are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's watch some movies.
Blade Runner.
A new life awaits you in the off-world colonies. The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity and adventure.
First question for you is, is this an apocalypse movie? Does this sort of fit the profile of the films that you're working on?
I would argue yes, for a couple reasons. First of all, apocalypse produces post-apocalypse, which manifests either as dystopia or utopia. Blade Runner is very clearly a dystopia. Within the text of the body of the film, you see that animals basically aren't real anymore. If they are real, they're the province of the unimaginably wealthy. Everything else is manufactured and artificial. You don't see a single tree in the entire film, except at that end coda.
Blade Runner 2049.
So what's really interesting to me about 2049 is that they don't mention climate change once, and it's not really relevant to the plot so much, but it informs every single scene that you see on screen, right? You have the snow in Los Angeles. You don't see the sun once in the entire film, right? If it's not snowing, it's raining. If it's not raining, it's overcast. If it's not overcast, you're in Las Vegas and it's like nuclear radiation, right? So there's no place that's been untouched by climate apocalypse. And you see this too, right? At the end of the first Blade Runner movie, you had that coda with the beautiful green landscape beyond Los Angeles. That doesn't exist in this film. The ecocide that we see hints of in the first Blade Runner has only gotten worse by the second.
It's a good point. It's back to that sort of theme of this being like not a subtle climate movie.
So there's this scholar, Matthew Schneider-Meyerson, who works on something called empirical ecocriticism. It's a branch of the environmental humanities where scholars try to measure with hard data the impact that environmental storytelling has on audiences. And what he's concluded is that environmental storytelling does have an impact on audiences. And there are other groups that have noted that environmental storytelling or environmental themes in film actually does better at the box office than non-environmental films. And so Matthew Schneider-Meyerson says they do have an impact, but it's not terribly long-lasting. So what the solution is every single story needs to be an environmental climate change story. And I think that's something that Blade Runner does because it's not explicitly a climate change story, but you can't look away from it.
That's, you know what, I'm glad you said that. That's one of my reactions as well. I've seen a lot of things in film and on television lately where they're trying to inject climate or sustainability themes into the story, but it seems very ham-fisted in a way. Like, okay, now we're going to like pause and do this side thing on recycling or something. Yeah. Whereas here, it's just sort of, to your earlier point, it's very inescapable. It's sort of the sort of the tragedy and the catastrophe and the apocalypse. It's always there. Yeah. And now they're just making it really obvious. Cool. All right, another one?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Pacific Rim.
We mourned our dead, memorialized the attack, and moved on. And then, only 6 months later, the second attack hit Manila.
The acid factor of the kaiju blood creates a toxic phenomenon named kaiju blue.
And then the third one hit Cabo. And then the fourth. And then we learned this was not going to stop. This was just the beginning.
But there are climate signifiers everywhere in the film, which is what kind of draws me to it in my project.
So one of those seems to be, we're going to all drop our individual self-interests and we're going to come together and tackle the problem.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the big themes of the film is that a better future is possible, but only if we all work together to get there. So you have the nations collaborating to build the Jaegers, and then even in the Shadow Dome, which is kind of the base where the Jaegers are situated, you have a veritable army of technicians, engineers, scientists, other personnel, all working to maintain these giant robots and make sure they're ready to go. And then you have the pilots themselves. You need 2 pilots to man a Jaeger. No victory is won alone. Everything is done in collaboration, and everything is only possible by dint of that immense collaboration.
This is why I think your research is so smart, because I think there are so many metaphors out there, and I can't help but wonder if the writers and the directors and the cast of this weren't thinking about climate catastrophe or environmental catastrophe while they were making this movie. It seems kind of implausible to me that they wouldn't have been, given all of these connections to climate and environment. But it takes someone like you to illuminate that for a broader audience.
Well, thank you. I'd also like to point to this British scholar, Mark Bold, who wrote this book, The Anthropocene Unconscious, which says that climate change is in everything, no matter if it's deliberate or not. Like, we can't escape it. It's just informs every piece of cultural production out there. And that's something I find really compelling, especially in texts like Pacific Rim, where it does seem kind of almost idiosyncratic that there is climate messaging in this movie, but it's there and you can't deny it once you see it.
All right. Another?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Mad Max Fury Road.
She's spent like her entire life trying to get back to this green place, which is so idyllic and so lush and so sustainable and beautiful, and she idealizes it in her memory, as we see in the Furiosa movie, to be told it's not there anymore. Like, she's been trying to get back to something that doesn't exist. I think that's such an acute metaphor for everything that, my generation and Gen Z and, the generations to follow are thinking about, right? Because we were promised this world that doesn't exist anymore, and we can't go back to reclaim it no matter how badly we want to. It's just not there. So what Fury Road does that's really compelling to me is it says that doesn't mean that there's no hope. We just have to use the tools we have available to us to try to build something better. And so they do that in Fury Road by turning around and reclaiming the Citadel, right? And they do this really cool thing at the end as Furiosa and the wives and Max get there and they show Immortan Joe's corpse. You have the young war boys, lowering the platform to bring them up, right? And that's a sign, I think, that, allies emerge in unusual or unexpected places. And yet they're all willing to work together to bring something new into being. And that's really powerful to me about Fury Road.
Fascinating. I'm also struck by the conversation that Max and Furiosa have about hope. I think the line is something like,
Hope is a mistake.
If you can't fix what's broken, you'll go insane.
So is that, do you agree with that? It sort of seems like, it almost to me feels like, again, someone like from my generation talking to someone, from your generation and sort of like schooling you on how to think about things.
I don't know what we would do if there was no hope. I think we need to have hope in order to bring a better future into being. There's this scholar I work with, Terry Eagleton. He's this Marxist literary critic from the UK, and he has this amazing book called Hope Without Optimism, which I highly encourage everyone to read. It's fascinating. But he distinguishes hope from optimism by saying optimism is just kind of like an innate disposition, right? You're either optimistic or you're not. And optimism doesn't require any kind of foundation in reality, but hope does. You can only hope for what's possible. And so, to me, I have hope that a better future is possible. I believe that a better future is possible, and so I can have hope. But hope is an action, right? And it demands action to bring that better future into being. And so Mad Max's comment to Furiosa, I think, really fits that moment because she's just lost all her hope. And yet he's the one who offers the solution to go back to the Citadel, right? He's the one who says, here's the way forward, and here's how you can actually build something that lasts. And so, I don't know, I think it's an interesting little mini arc for Max's character that he, goes from having no hope, no drive except survival to thinking, well, no, there's something actually we can do. There's something more than just survival in the wasteland.
All right, should we keep going?
Yeah.
All right, this is fun. Let's hit it.
Snowpiercer. Bill McKibben in The End of Nature, which was the first book on climate change for a lay audience, says that, climate change comes from everywhere. In order to fix it, we have to fix everything. And I think that's something that Snowpiercer kind of alludes to. The system is so deeply broken, you can't fix it by doing one thing. You have to either change the entire system or break it entirely. I think we have a responsibility to imagine alternatives because if we can't imagine alternatives, we're not going to get anywhere. Capitalism is the primary force that's destroying our planet. It's, invested in overconsumption, in extracting every penny of profit out of natural resources, no matter the environmental damage, and out of people, no matter the damage to people too. And so capitalism, especially in the world of Snowpiercer, you have this enormous gap, right, between the rich and the poor. Extreme gaps between the rich and the poor historically have led to civilizational collapse. So the fact that we see these classes really concretizing in our own world should be a huge source of concern for us, because that kind of instability, if people can't survive or make a living or feel safe or comfortable or secure, then what else are they going to do, right? If you don't give people peaceful means to improve their station, they're going to turn to violent ones.
Okay, I want to cut to another film we're going to watch now in a second, but I think it, to me, captures some of the aspects of climate change that maybe sort of tap into the slower violence of climate change. So you cool?
Yeah,
We'll take a look? All right, let's do it. Interstellar. So, the opening scenes where people are giving their kind of testimonials at the beginning before the picture really starts, it's very Great Depression-y. It's very Dust Bowl-y. And as we know, we kind of survived the Dust Bowl. So that kind of gives me some hope. But then we return to these tropes that we've seen in the other pictures, going back to Blade Runner, the off-world colonies. That's how we survive. We get in our spaceship. And again, it's not everybody. Like a lot of folks are going to be left behind.
Yeah. That's something that actually really troubles me about Interstellar. Like, we don't have a planet B, right? Where there's no place else for us to run. There are no higher dimensional beings who are going to, create a wormhole for us to escape our own apocalypse. We just have to use the tools we have to do what we can to mitigate it. The idea of kind of giving in and running away, as I think you phrased it in your question, Ariane, really does not sit well with me as a scholar of climate-inflected apocalypse narratives.
Anne Hathaway's monologue about love as the one thing that maybe you don't discount, that sort of transcends space and time, and for that reason has power. That, to me, is something that I did want to hear in a climate movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really powerful. I've thought a lot about my project in terms of, what is art worth in this particular apocalyptic moment? And kind of the conclusion I've come to, the preliminary conclusion at any rate, is that art might not save the world, but the world can't be saved without art. And I think that love kind of operates on a similar frequency. Like, love alone might not save the world because you need scientific expertise, you need a political consensus, you need all these other things, and yet love can motivate all these other things, right? If anything can save the world, maybe it is love.
That's interesting too, because now that you mention that, you're a humanist. I, have a degree in oceanography and then psychology. Anne Hathaway's character is also, like a biologist, and but then she's very much playing the role of humanist, and she's sort of going through this, I think, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary kind of recasting of kind of the place of her work in the universe.
Yeah, which I think is just so beautiful because we are going to need those interdisciplinary connections, right? I think there's been a study like the most impactful papers that come out are the ones that cross disciplines and make these connections across different fields. But it's the emotional decision that's vindicated because she finds the future home for the human species.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating stuff. Okay, we have more.
WALL-E. There's this really interesting way in which WALL-E kind of literalizes the battle between hope and despair. You have those scenes in the captain's cabin, right, where you have the captain versus Otto, the autopilot. And Otto's like, the world can't be saved. We're just going to stay out here in space and, there's no hope in going back. But the captain has so much hope and he wins, right? Hope wins the day. And they go back. And something that struck me as we were just watching this now is you have WALL-E kind of building all these towers, right? These skyscrapers, monuments to overconsumption, and then as soon as the Axiom docks, you have one of those kind of crumbling into pieces, right? Which kind of symbolizes, I think, this idea of a new way of doing things, a new lifestyle that isn't so built on, extractive consumption.
What are the benefits of aiming these kinds of stories at a very young generation?
The power of storytelling is to get people to change their perspective and maybe change their behavior because of that. Aiming these stories at people who are so young that they're willing to make those changes is, I think, really powerful and can affect huge change if people kind of internalize the message of the story. And WALL-E, I think, gives such a good message about how, finding beauty in the midst of the apocalypse like WALL-E does, right? I mean, he collects all these trinkets and finds such joy and beauty in them. And then, also finding ways to minimize our consumption and finding ways to give back to the planet that we live on and make sure it doesn't get to that point. I really don't see a downside in, giving that message to kids, and especially not a message that ends with so much hope the way WALL-E does.
Are there depictions in some of the things that you've worked on or that you've seen of a present day and future that is a little bit more hopeful, that's a little bit more kind of verdant and just?
There's this whole genre called solar punk, and we're going to take a look at a couple films that deal with that.
All right.
of course, this is kind of like the example par excellence of solar punk. You have all this futuristic technology in combination with this very long tradition of, agriculture, and the technology is furthering the agriculture, not like interfering with it. And you have that beautiful city in the backdrop and the flying vehicles and everything. It's like quintessential solar punk.
So when I think of narrative and storytelling, I think of conflict and protagonists and antagonists and the hero's journey and all that kind of stuff.
Course.
And I didn't see it here. So I'm curious, why was this made?
It was a Chobani ad.
Are you serious?
I know you'll be okay, come rain or shine. And remember, a business is only as good as its people. So treat
All right,
them
this is
well.
fucked.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to bleep that out. I'm watching the original, and I'm very with you on solar punk, and I'm like, wow, like this is really interesting, and what is this? And I'm like very intrigued, and now I'm very ripped off. I feel very let down by this. Do you?
Yeah, it's really frustrating. I mean, it is a very alluring vision of the future, but it's one that's ultimately in the service of getting us to buy more Chobani products.
In plastic containers, no less.
In plastic containers, yeah. They haven't even updated their products to be more sustainable.
Well, maybe they used like direct air capture of carbon dioxide and then used the captured carbon to make like new polymers.
I mean, that's a stretch, I think.
All right.
Like we can hope so in the world of Dear Alice, but I don't think the animators put that much thought into it.
Well, and there's the payoff right there. It's Chobani. Wow,
Yeah.
I feel ripped off to the point where I think this was like failing grade on this Chobani ad, and sort of like cultivating feelings that draw on this sort of solar punk genre that I'm learning about, but then pay you off in the end with like, okay, buy yogurt.
Yeah, it's very much kind of extracting profit from hope. Right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's doing. The thing I hope people most take away from my work is hope. I hope that they can see all the ways in which the authors and creators and artists that I'm working with are taking the really difficult job of imagining different futures for us through climate change, even if it's not super obvious on the surface, and that there is hope in these futures, right? We can't build a better future unless we can imagine it, and people are doing the work of imagining it. So we do have a bit of a roadmap ahead of us for the next few steps at least.
So what do you do with your work product? Obviously, a PhD is years of work and of research and of thinking. You write a dissertation. What happens after that? Is it a book? Does someone make a movie out of your work?
That would be super cool. I only know Aryan. You're the only filmmaker I know, so it depends on what you want to do. But yeah, ideally, this would be a book. I've been exploring some new angles of the research. My blog post for Wrigley it talks about some of those new angles that I'm thinking about, and I would really love to develop those more into a book-length project.
Yeah, you're reminding me. Actually, your blog post for the Wrigley Institute's website and blog was amazing, and I actually had printed out some stuff that I wanted to ask you about. But what I'm going to do is not do that, and actually encourage the audience to go to the website and have a look at Aidan's blog. It's spot on. So the book, back to the book that you're hoping is the work product for this. Is it a book for scholars? Is it a book for the public? How do you want to sort of get the word out broadly?
I want my interpretations and the hope that I find there to be accessible to people who are invested in pop culture.
Well, I really hope you keep at it. I really hope you do write something that's public facing. Aidan Diamond, thanks so much. It was fun talking to you.
Wonderful.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you again for joining us for this conversation with Aidan Diamond. If you enjoyed it, fret not, there are way more of these videos coming. These Wrigley Fellows are amazing, and I'll be sitting down in conversation with many more of them. So if you like this conversation, hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when the next videos come out. And importantly for us, if you like the video, please hit the thumbs up like button. We'd really appreciate it. It means a lot. Thanks again. Take care of yourself.